I hope you're well. Winter has finally caught up with Perth and it is freezing today. It's about maximum of 16 degrees, which for us in WA is really cold. Today I will be talking about all the books that I read in June. The first book I read in June was Idaho by Emily Ruskovich. Sadly I had to take that book back to the library. The cover is beautiful and is kind of part of the reason why I picked it up. Luckily, the cover matched the inside of the book. The book is told from multiple characters' perspectives, and it starts off with a lady called Anne. She is living up in the Idaho mountains with her husband. We slowly find out that he previously had another wife and 2 children, and a tragic occurrence happened to cause his first wife to go to prison, one of his children to die, and the other one to disappear. I really enjoyed the writing in this book. She's a first-time novelist, and it's always so impressive when first-time novelists are so good at what they do already. The atmosphere she created was really evocative, and as she grew up in the Idaho mountains herself, I imagine it's a really accurate representation of what it's like to live there. The book jumps back a lot between time, starts off with Anne in the early 2000s and jumps back to the time of her husband living with his previous wife, and then it also jumped back to him as a child, and then also jumped forward a bit as well to 2025 I think it was. Having the timelines all a bit mixed up I think really added to the intrigue of the story. So I really enjoyed it until the end. I felt the ending was a little bit of a letdown. It was a relatively ambiguous ending, and I felt like after the very high emotion of the rest of the story that readers deserved a bit more of a definite ending and a few more answers to some of the questions. I definitely still recommend it despite the ending, and I'm excited to see what Emily Ruskovich writes next. The second book I read in June was Sargasso Sea by Rhys. I've been really interested to read this book for a long time, as Jane Eyre is one of my favourite books. This tells the story of Bertha Mason, the mad lady locked up in the attic in the story of Jane Eyre. The author Rhys grew up in Jamaica, just like the character of Bertha. So this book draws on Rhys's own experiences to create and imagine what Bertha's origin story might have been. I think this is a really important accompaniment to Jane Eyre. As much as I adore and love Jane Eyre, there is always that thing of Bertha just being treated as this crazy lady, and all the problematic things that go along with that, considering she is from Jamaica, and also considering how terribly Rochester treated her. In this book, Rhys gives Bertha another name, Antoinette, saying that Bertha is actually a name that Rochester gives her. And so Antoinette comes from a white family who used to own slaves, but then anti-slavery laws came in and her father dies, and they're not very wealthy, so they're kind of stuck in this place between white people not accepting them but also the black people not accepting them either. It's split into 3 parts. So the first part is about Antoinette's childhood. The second part is from Mr. Rochester's point of view, and that is about their marriage. I found that section dragged a little bit, especially as Mr. Rochester is portrayed as not a particularly nice person, which I was fine with because I don't consider him a particularly romantic character anyway, but it got a little bit repetitive. And then the last section is really short. It deals with a particularly famous scene in Jane Eyre, but from Antoinette's point of view, and that was just really sad because it just shows that she wasn't mad. Of course she wasn't mad. She had a mental illness brought upon by the way she was treated by all the men in her life. So I wouldn't say I exactly enjoyed it, but I think it's really important to read it if I'm going to enjoy the story of Jane Eyre, and I think I'll have to read it again to really understand everything that Rhys is saying. The third and last book I read in June was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. I absolutely adored this book. This is a story of 4 British women who rent out an Italian castle and get away from either their husbands or their mundane lives in England, and is about how they transform as a result of spending a month in the Italian spring. I spent a lot of time reading this while sitting in the sun, which really helped bring to life the amazing descriptions of all the plants and the flowers and the weather. The author based the setting on a castle that she stayed in Italy. Just made me even more want to visit Italy. It was written in the 1920s, so it has a very old world British style, which I really enjoy reading. And it's also simultaneously an interesting look at women at the time. The 2 main women who organised the trip to Italy family. They are sort of middle class housewives without any children, and they both have a little bit of money set aside, but in the first few chapters they struggle with even knowing whether they want to go to the castle because they feel so guilty for spending all this money on themselves. Both these women have difficult relationships with their husbands, and during the course of the month they invite their husbands to come and stay with them in the castle because they think that the magic of this Italian landscape will be able to revitalize their relationship. You get to see from the points of views of every character in the book, and so it's kind of has a bittersweet ending in that their husbands do come visit the castle, and the two ladies, Lottie and Rose, think that love has been rekindled, and it kind of has, but not really for the reasons that they thought it had been. But I did like how realistic that was. Apart from that, it's just a very funny book, really beautifully written. Definitely recommend it as a good winter read to try and forget about the cold grey weather outside. The fourth book that I tried to read but didn't quite finish in June was Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Thien. Normally when I start books I try and determine whether I think I'm going to enjoy this book and continue reading it before I put it on Goodreads, just because I hate having to list that I've not finished a book. So I thought this was going to be the case for this book. I got 156 pages in, but it got to the point where I was staring out the train window instead of reading. I knew that it was time to put it down and try something else. This book is about a girl called Marie. She's a child in Canada in the 90s, and her father has just gone back to China and died there. And then a lady comes from China to stay with her and her mum in Canada, and this lady knew her father, and she starts telling Marie a story, and you slowly realize the story is about both their fathers and their other relatives. I was enjoying the story and really enjoying the historical aspects about it because it talks about China during World War II and then after World War II, and also has bits about Tiananmen Square. But I found the writing style a little bit distant. It was sort of written like a fable, and I found the characters a little bit one-dimensional in the way that fables tend to tell characters. And this always kept me at a distance from what was going on in the book and made it hard to get emotionally invested, especially as you kind of know what's going to happen to the characters, as in the characters in the story in the past in China. You kind of know what's going to happen to them. I feel like if this had been a film, I would have definitely kept watching and been interested, but unfortunately the book itself and the writing style was not keeping me interested enough to keep reading. That's all I read in June. Let me know if you've read any of those books and your opinions on them, and let me know if you have any recommendations of good books that you've read in June. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!